Okay, we'll get going in just a second. To those that may not watch this live, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, and we are waiting for President Biden to speak on Afghanistan. I want to make sure that we listen to that. So if it's live, we'll listen to it live and talk about it a little bit here. But we'll talk about some things locally, but I don't want to miss that speech because Afghanistan's a mess, and part of this is on. Oh, hold on.
Closely monitoring the situation on the ground in Afghanistan and moving quickly to execute the plans we had put in place to respond to every constituency, including and contingency, including the rapid collapse we're seeing now. I'll speak more in a moment about the specific steps we're taking, but I want to remind everyone how we got here and what America's interests are in Afghanistan. We went to Afghanistan almost 20 years ago with clear goals. Get those who attacked us on September 11th, 2001, and make sure Al-Qaeda could not use Afghanistan as a base from which to attack us again. We did that. We severely degraded Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We never gave up the hunt for Osama bin Laden, and we got him. That was a decade ago. Our mission in Afghanistan was never supposed to have been nation building. It was never supposed to be creating a unified, centralized democracy. Our only vital national interest in Afghanistan remains today what it has always been: preventing a terrorist attack on America's homeland. I've argued for many years that our mission should be narrowly focused on counterterrorism, not counterinsurgency or nation building. That's why I opposed the surge when it was proposed in 2009 when I was vice president. And that's why as president, I'm adamant we focus on the threats we face today in 2021, not yesterday's threats. Today, the terrorist threat has metastasized well beyond Afghanistan. Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, al-Nusra in Syria, ISIS attempting to create a caliphate in Syria and Iraq, and establishing affiliates in multiple countries in Africa and Asia. These threats warrant our attention and our resources. We conduct effective counterterrorism missions against terrorist groups in multiple countries where we don't have permanent military presence. If necessary, we'll do the same in Afghanistan. We've developed counterterrorism over-the-horizon capability that will allow us to keep our eyes firmly fixed on the direct threats to the United States and the region, and act quickly and decisively if needed. When I came into office, I inherited a deal that President Trump negotiated with the Taliban. Under his agreement, U.S. forces would be out of Afghanistan by May 1, 2021, just a little over 3 months after I took office. U.S. forces had already drawn down during the Trump administration from roughly 15,500 American forces to 2,500 troops in country. And the Taliban was at its strongest militarily since 2001. The choice I had to make as your president was either to follow through on that agreement or be prepared to go back to fighting the Taliban in the middle of the spring fighting season. There would have been no ceasefire after May 1. There was no agreement protecting our forces after May 1. There was no status quo of stability without American casualties after May 1. There was only a cold reality of either following through on the agreement to withdraw our forces or escalating the conflict and sending thousands more American troops back into combat in Afghanistan, lurching into the third decade of conflict. I stand squarely behind my decision. After 20 years, I've learned the hard way that there was never a good time to withdraw U.S. forces. That's why we're still there. We were clear-eyed about the risk. We planned for every contingency, but I always promised the American people that I would be straight with you. The truth is, this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated.
Yeah.
So what's happened? Afghanistan political leaders gave up and fled the country. The Afghan military collapsed, sometime without trying to fight.
That's true.
If anything, the developments of the past week reinforced that ending U.S. military involvement in Afghanistan now was the right decision. American troops cannot and should not be fighting in a war and dying in a war that Afghan forces are not willing to fight for themselves. We spent over $1 trillion. We trained and equipped an Afghan military force with some 300,000 strong, incredibly well equipped, a force larger in size than the militaries of many of our NATO allies. We gave them every tool they could need. We paid their salaries, provided for the maintenance of their Air Force, something the Taliban doesn't have. Taliban does not have an Air Force. We provided close air support. We gave them every chance to determine their own future. What we could not provide them was the will to fight for that future. There's some very brave and capable Afghan special forces units and soldiers. But if Afghanistan is unable to mount any real resistance to the Taliban now, there is no chance that 1 year, 1 more year, 5 more years, or 20 more years, the U.S. military boots on the ground would have made any difference. Here's what I believe to my core. It is wrong to order American troops to step up when Afghanistan's own armed forces would not. The political leaders of Afghanistan were unable to come together for the good of their people, unable to negotiate for the future of their country when the chips were down. They would never have done so while U.S. troops remained in Afghanistan, bearing the brunt of the fighting for them. And our true strategic competitors, China and Russia, would love nothing more than the United States to continue to funnel billions of dollars in resources and attention into stabilizing Afghanistan indefinitely. When I hosted President Ghani and Chairman Abdullah at the White House in June, and again when I spoke by phone to Ghani in July, we had very frank conversations. We talked about how Afghanistan should prepare to fight their civil wars after the U.S. military departed, to clean up the corruption in government so the government could function for the Afghan people. We talked extensively about the need for Afghan leaders to unite politically. They failed to do any of that. I also urged them to engage in diplomacy, to seek a political settlement with the Taliban. This advice was flatly refused. Mr. Ghani insisted the Afghan forces would fight, but obviously he was wrong. So I'm left again to ask of those who argue that we should stay, how many more generations of America's daughters and sons
I don't think people are arguing that.
would you have me send to fight Afghanistan's civil war when Afghan troops will not? How many more lives, American lives, is it worth? How many endless rows of headstones at Arlington National Cemetery? I'm clear on my answer. I will not repeat the mistakes we've made in the past. Mistake of staying and fighting indefinitely in a conflict that is not in the national interest of the United States, of doubling down on a civil war in a foreign country, of attempting to remake a country through the endless military deployments of U.S. forces. Those are the mistakes we cannot continue to repeat because we have significant vital interest in the world that we cannot afford to ignore. I also want to acknowledge how painful this is to so many of us. The scenes we're seeing in Afghanistan, they're gut-wrenching, particularly for our veterans, our diplomats, humanitarian workers, for anyone who has spent time on the ground working to support the Afghan people, for those who have lost loved ones in Afghanistan, and for Americans who have fought and served in the country, serve our country in Afghanistan. This is deeply, deeply personal. It is for me as well. I've worked on these issues as long as anyone. I've been throughout Afghanistan during this war, while the war was going on, from Kabul to Kandahar to the Kunar Valley. I've traveled there on 4 different occasions. I met with the people. I've spoken to the leaders. I spent time with our troops. And I came to understand firsthand what was and was not possible in Afghanistan. So now we're focused on what is possible. We will continue to support the Afghan people. We will lead with our diplomacy, our international influence, and our humanitarian aid. We'll continue to push for regional diplomacy and engagement to prevent violence and instability. We'll continue to speak out for the basic rights of the Afghan people, of women and girls, just as we speak out all over the world. I've been clear, the human rights must be the center of our foreign policy, not the periphery. But the way to do it is not through endless military deployments. It's with our diplomacy, our economic tools, and rallying the world to join us. Let me lay out the current mission in Afghanistan. I was asked to authorize, and I did, 6,000 U.S. troops to deploy to Afghanistan for the purpose of assisting in the departure of U.S. and allied civilian personnel from Afghanistan, and to evacuate our Afghan allies and vulnerable Afghans to safety outside of Afghanistan. Our troops are working to secure the airfield and ensure continued operation of both the civilian and military flights. We're taking over air traffic control. We have safely shut down our embassy and transferred our diplomats. Our diplomatic presence is now consolidated at the airport as well. Over the coming days, we intend to transport out thousands of American citizens who've been living and working in Afghanistan. We'll also continue to support the safe departure of civilian personnel, the civilian personnel of our allies who are still serving in Afghanistan. Operation Allies Refugee, which I announced back in July, has already moved 2,000 Afghans who are eligible for special immigration visas and their families to the United States. In the coming days, the U.S. military will provide assistance to move more SIV eligible Afghans and their families out of Afghanistan. We're also expanding refugee access to cover other vulnerable Afghans who work for our embassy, U.S. non-governmental agencies, or U.S. non-governmental organizations, and Afghans who otherwise are at great risk, in U.S. news agencies. I know there are concerns about why we did not begin evacuating Afghans civilians sooner. Part of the answer is some of the Afghans did not want to leave earlier, still hopeful for their country. And part of it because the Afghan government and its supporters discouraged us from organizing a mass exodus to avoid triggering, as they said, a crisis of confidence. American troops are performing this mission as professionally and as effectively as they always do, but it is not without risks. As we carry out this departure, we have made it clear to the Taliban, if they attack our personnel or disrupt our operation, the U.S. presence will be swift and the response will be swift and forceful. We will defend our people with devastating force if necessary. Our current military mission will be short in time, limited in scope, and focused in its objectives. Get our people and our allies as safely as quickly as possible. And once we have completed this mission, we will conclude our military withdrawal. We'll end America's longest war after 20 long years of bloodshed. The events we're seeing now are sadly proof that no amount of military force would ever deliver a stable, united, secure Afghanistan, as known in history as the graveyard of empires. Mm-hmm. What's happening now could just as easily happen 5 years ago or 15 years in the future. You have to be honest. Our mission in Afghanistan is taking many missteps, made many missteps over the past 2 decades. I'm now the 4th American president to preside over war in Afghanistan, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. I will not pass this responsibility on to a 5th president. I will not mislead the American people by claiming that just a little more time in Afghanistan will make all the difference. Nor will I shrink from my share of responsibility for where we are today and how we must move forward from here. I am President of the United States of America, and the buck stops with me. I'm deeply saddened by the facts we now face, but I do not regret my decision to end America's warfighting in Afghanistan and maintain a laser focus on our counterterrorism mission there and other parts of the world. Our mission to degrade the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and kill Osama bin Laden was a success. Our decades-long effort to overcome centuries of history and permanently change and remake Afghanistan was not, and I wrote and believed it never could be. I cannot and will not ask our troops to fight on endlessly in another country's civil war, taking casualties, suffering life-shattering injuries, leaving families broken by grief and loss. This is not in our national security interest. It is not what the American people want. It is not what our troops who have sacrificed so much over the past 2 decades deserve. I made a commitment to the American people when I ran for president that I would bring America's military involvement in Afghanistan to an end. While it's been hard and messy, and yes, far from perfect, I've honored that commitment. More importantly, I made a commitment to the brave men and women who serve this nation that I wasn't going to ask them to continue to risk their lives in a military action that should have ended long ago. Our leaders did that in Vietnam when I got here as a young man. I will not do it in Afghanistan. I know my decision will be criticized, but I would rather take all that criticism than pass this decision on to another president of the United States, yet another one, a 5th one. Because it's the right one, it's the right decision for our people, the right one for our brave service members who risk their lives serving our nation. And it's the right one for America. Thank you. May God protect our troops, our diplomats, and all brave Americans serving in harm's way.
Okay, I didn't want to get started while the president was speaking. And I was waiting for that. I'll be honest with you, I thought that was excellent. I don't think anybody is arguing at this point to increase troops. We just heard from the president 6,000 new troops are going to Afghanistan to help to get those that we want to get out of there. There's no question this is a mess. This is a mess. As the president said, there was likely no easy way to do this. It was going to be a mess no matter what. Now, I will argue he gave some reasons why this didn't start earlier. I get that if you start removing a ton of residents and Americans from there, people start getting nervous. I get that. I understand that. But I think you did have to do a better job of getting them out. That said, the speech he just gave was right. We could have gone through this 5 years ago, or we could go through this in 20 years. It will likely be the same process. It will likely still be a mess. And I actually think Biden just gave a very, very, very good speech and explained the issue well. He stands by his decision. I think everyone does. I don't think anybody wants to be in Afghanistan anymore. And there's no way, there's no, this is not the end of the Civil War in America where we meet in a house somewhere in Jill or Appomattox and we shake hands and we go our separate ways. That's not how this works in the Middle East. The Middle East has been a disaster forever. It's arrogant to believe we're going to fix it. It's arrogant to believe any future generation is going to fix it. And the right decision to get out. Now, in the time from here, and I think in about 2-3 months, you're going to start hearing horror stories. Women in these areas are going to be treated awful. You're going to hear about people who helped Americans, who were Afghanis, who helped Americans, who were allies to Americans, who are not treated well or killed down the road. It's going to happen. There's going to be some negative consequences to this. But that would be the case whether it happens now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now or 20 years from now. I don't know if there's an actual right way to do this. So 6,000 troops going to Afghanistan helping. The Taliban has been warned by Biden that they should not attack. I suspect the Taliban will not. You know, if they want any respect on a worldwide level, and I think they certainly do, pissing off America right now is not the right thing to do. America is trying to get out. They want to get their allies out. They want to get Americans out. I don't know. I mean, I'm not there, but all the reports I'm hearing is that no Americans have been killed or attacked or what have you so far. So it would make sense if the Taliban is looking for any level of credibility down the road that they would avoid any conflict from here or the next few weeks as America withdraws from Afghanistan. So I do think overall that was a very good speech by Biden. He explained, he knows it's going to be tough, but he doesn't want to hand it off. And that was what happened in the past. It kept getting handed off because nobody wanted to own what was going to happen next. What's going to happen next is not going to be pretty. If any American lives are lost, it's going to get much worse politically. But I think Biden basically explained that, and I think he did a good job. So just the comment, Marie, how are you? Richard really misjudged how fast they should have moved people out a lot early. We've avoided the chaos they have right now. It's a disservice to the people that helped us. So his logic makes sense, right? The question from the Afghani government was, if you suddenly take 10,000 people out of Afghanistan and neighbors and residents start seeing all these people disappearing, it will cause a panic. It will cause a crisis of confidence. It's basically a run on a bank. So that's true. That said, I kind of agree. I agree they should have found a way quietly to move out some of the key people. You know, getting Americans out might be much easier now, but getting the Afghanis out who are in there, who were our allies, once America's gone, what are their odds? You know, people who helped Afghanistan, helped America during the last 15, 20 years, their neighbors know it. It's known that they were allies to America. If they're stuck there after this, they're not long for this world. So maybe something better should have happened there. But I could understand. I certainly want to be out of Afghanistan. I think most people do. Left and right want to be. And it is true, Donald Trump did sign the agreement to do that. So I think the speech started off, it looked like it was going to be a little bit of a blame game. And I was like, oh, no, don't go there. But then he took responsibility for it. And I give him credit for that. I think he gave a very good, balanced speech. I think the nation needed to hear that. So we'll move past Afghanistan and talk about Brantford. Good afternoon. Glad to be here. Usually it's 4 o'clock, but it's 4:25 instead. So we'll go a little bit longer and talk about some of the issues today. Hope everybody had a great weekend. Stayed cool in that ridiculous heat. And thankfully, we've had an amazing day yesterday and a really beautiful day so far today. Our main topics today, we're going to talk about Tabor and we'll talk about masks a little bit. So 2 things happened. One, Tom Brockett, who's running against Jamie Cosgrove in Brantford, put out a video. You know, it is interesting how politics works. Now I got to tell you this. The people on the Republican side, the Jamie Cosgroves, the Ray Ingrahams of the world, they've been in Brantford forever, right? They have been involved forever. Ingraham's the head of the Republican Party. I've said this before. If there's somebody in the fifth district that hasn't been helped by Ray Graham, I'd love to find out who they are, because he's just that kind of guy, from coaching and his girls through the school system. Then you have Cosgrove, and that's an iconic Branford family. The other side, the head of the party is a kid named Kevin Coughlin, who moved here 2 years ago. And he is a press person for the Connecticut Senate Democrats. He's a professional political operative. And you're seeing that. You're seeing things come out from the Brockett campaign and from the Democrats that are misleading, but truly have no concept of actual history. So over the weekend, Tom Brockett put out a video, and he calls it the two Tabors, the two sides of Tabor. And he takes videos of what he thinks are the good things at Tabor, the trail and Chet's Pond and the labyrinth, all things done by Jamie Cosgrove, by the way. And then he shows pictures of logs being stored there, and then some concrete stuff, storage, or something that's going there from a project in the past. And this is the bad side, and he wants to form a committee to discuss what should go at Tabor and get environmental people and what have you, and have a process by which we decide what should go at Tabor. Okay, that sounds great. Sounds brilliant. Here's the problem with, there's a bunch of factual issues. One, he's standing on top of Ecology Hill and he says this is part of Tabor. Ecology Hill is not part of Tabor. It's not part of the 77 acres. So now Brockett was not involved at the time. Kevin Coughlin has no idea what the history of this is. But just to let you know, the history of Tabor was, it was a gravel pit. It's basically a wasteland. Now, over time, stuff grows back and it goes through just like it does through sidewalks, but it's a shit show. It's basically what it is. It was a gravel pit for years and years. It was sold a few times. Then developers came in, made a proposal to build residences on it. And they were going to be basically single floor residents. At one point, they talked about seniors only, and the town was all for it. And Uncle Ross at the time was, we want to do this. We want to do, according to the developers, that he was for it. He wanted to put a golf course in there with it. And it was this huge, it was going to do great. And then one of the proposals was to come in with affordable housing. And suddenly the town's tenor changed. And we don't want this. Now, the Democrats ran this. So this is the Democrats with DeRoss, who, and by the way, on the Republican side, the highest ranking Republican at the time was Kurt Schwanfelder, who's now running on Brockett's ticket. So you can put two and two together here, but that's beside the point. The town decides to take a vote to take the property by eminent domain. The developers sue, and the property owners sue, and the property owners win. Over the course of this, they had to pay the property owners about $4 million, but in legal fees and in interest and all the other fees that come with it, you had about $19 to $20 million that this property, this wasteland, cost the town and taxpayers to essentially avoid affordable housing going there. This is why I laughed my ass off when Democrats were at Parkside fighting for affordable housing, because they're so full of shit. It's not funny. They spent $20 million fighting affordable housing at Tabor to acquire this wasteland. So that property's sitting there. Before DeRoss leaves office, he's like, we got to do something with this property. And he forms a committee to decide where public works should go. And they looked at 4 or 5 properties, and Tabor was one of them. And lo and behold, they decided that they want to put public works on the Tabor property. There's a million reasons it makes no sense. There's no infrastructure on Tabor. There's no plumbing. There's no pipes. There's no drainage. There's no electrical. There's none of that stuff on Tabor. So all of it has to start from nothing. There's no soil on Tabor. It was basically a wasteland. It was a gravel pit. To make it worse, you couldn't actually get there because Tabor Drive at some point will be underwater, as everybody knows. And part of the plan was to raise Tabor Drive up until they realized how expensive that was going to be. So it was just a disaster. Neighbors got together. If you remember, Fred Russo and a bunch of other neighbors got together and said, we don't want this here. We don't want development at Tabor. Fight this. Jamie Cosgrove gets in office and he says, we're not putting public works at Tabor. We're moving that to a location on the other side of town, and we're not doing anything with Tabor. And Jamie has said, if I'm in office, there will be no development on Tabor. In the meantime, Cosgrove has done some things that are passive. So he has allowed a labyrinth to go there. They built the Shoreline Greenway Trail, which is paved. And many people have been over there. It's quite beautiful. Chet's Pond is cleaned up and looks great. And he also added, which Tom Brockett didn't say, interestingly, a huge solar farm to increase energy conservation for the town. So a lot of positive things have gone on this wasteland of a property. It was a gravel pit. It cannot easily be something else. The idea that you're suddenly going to make this into a giant park is comical. You cannot be done for any small amount of money. It's a massive, massive undertaking. So Brockett, who's basically been running on Cosgrove's accomplishments anyway, he's running on, solar. We have a solar farm. He's running on energy conservation. Jamie's done that to our town buildings. He's running on coastal resiliency funding. Jamie initiated the coastal resiliency fund. So this is all crazy. But Cosgrove gets all these things in there, and Brockett puts a video out that says, here's the good things, and Cosgrove is using this as a dumping ground, and it's terrible. And if he gets in office, he'll form this committee that will look into what they should do there, environmentally friendly, what have you. Now, this was a proposal, not from Brockett, but from Wayne Cook. If you don't know who Wayne Cook is, he's the guy who was driving around town with a truck and the music playing for years. And he's guy, everybody's corrupt. He attacked every administration. That's what he's done professionally, basically, for the last 20 years. There's a proposal put out by him about 6-7 months ago, and some of his little, minions, they got 50 people or so to sign it. They went to the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Selectmen said no. The Board of Selectmen did not move forward on that. There's a reason that you don't move forward on something like that. The neighbors don't want development there. If you start forming a committee to create a master plan, you open the door for the development you may not want. When the town lost in court in the Tabor case, the judge decided that the highest and best use for that property was residential development. So there is a legal decision that residential development should go on the Tabor property. We have a massive push right now for affordable housing. Around the corner, Beacon is building affordable housing. They're huge. If you start forming a committee to create a master plan, you demand public hearings, and you're going to get ideas that you don't want on that property. Now, before people can say, I'm just saying this because Tom Brockett put it, no, I said this 6 months ago. You can go back in our podcast and see this response months and months ago when it came from Wayne Cook. You do not open a door if you don't know what's going to come through it. If you open that door in a master plan and start having public hearings and public input on what should go there, I guarantee you affordable housing advocates will come forward and say, wait, a judge said the best use is residential development. Guilford just took their public property and made some affordable housing. Let's make a proposal. Beacon's around the corner. If you propose that, Mr. Brockett, you're an idiot. And clearly, you and Coughlin don't know the history of this property. Don't know what happened legally. Don't know that it was taken and that we had to pay out $20 million. Then he shows pictures of the so-called dumping, and he goes to logs that are piled up on the property. You know what those logs are? They're from the recent storm. When the town said, take your trees that have calmed down and put them on the edge of your house, we'll pick them up for you. So what he's saying is dumping was a massive service that Jamie Cosgrove and Public Works did for the town, where they said, we'll take the large logs and trees down and take them to a place for you. We'll take them there. The dumping that's happened on that facility on Tabor Drive started way before Jamie Cosgrove ever got in office. Don't look now, but a lot of the dumping and waste from the firehouse project, which was done during DeRoss when Democrats were in control, it's a Tabor, Mr. Brockett. So your video is dishonest. I suspect you know it's dishonest. I suspect you know you were trying to mislead people. What's sad about it, though, is you lived in this town. If you don't know what happened in the last 10, 15 years on Tabor, you're inept. If you know what happened in the last 10, 15 years in Tabor, then you're a liar. So you get to pick which one. You're inept or a liar. Either one. Because nobody in the Indian Neck area and nobody in the Pine Orchard area who wants to see just passive uses on there and doesn't want development on that property should be voting for Brockett. He just put out the dumbest video. It's funny because I go under it and I look at the likes, and you're seeing people, and they're Democrats and they're brainwashed. Like, we understand. Both parties have brainwashed nut jobs, right? The people who are going to vote for Republican or vote for Democrat no matter what. Jesus Christ could come and run on the other side. They're voting for their party. I get that. But to see some of those people who are lower on the ticket and looking for seats, looking to get on the Board of Education, looking to get on other boards on the RTM, liking a video that is dishonest and misleading, do your research before you show support for somebody that's lying to you. Do your research before you show support somebody who's trying to mislead you. So far, we have this barren wasteland that Cosgrove in the last 6-8 years has added a shoreline greenway trail, a ton of solar energy, a labyrinth, Chet's Pond. It's a beautiful area. We're moving in the right direction, and we're doing it without creating opportunities for a developer to walk in, without creating opportunities for the affordable housing people to walk in and say, wait a minute, Brantford has less than our affordable housing stock designated as affordable, so we can come in here and push this. And wait a minute, the Supreme Court judged that the highest and best use of this was residential development. And wait a minute, we have affordable housing around the corner, developer already doing it. It's easy for them to come in. Don't stupidly open that door. And it's the same thing I said 6 months ago when Wayne Cook put a petition out that said that. It's idiotic. And you clearly don't know or don't care about what happened and what this town went through in the 7-8 years prior to Jamie Cosgrove getting in office. The first thing Cosgrove did when he got in office was end the Tabor lawsuits, because DeRoss was just appealing forever. They weren't going anywhere. We're going to get crushed. The second thing he did was stop public works at Tabor. Keep it as it is. If passive opportunities come up, fine. Do not open the door for development and affordable housing at Tabor. Do not listen to Brockett. He's full of shit. I was shocked reading that, seeing that video. Blown away seeing that video. Because this is clearly someone who has no history or no understanding of the history of this town. Now, Coughlin, I understand. Coughlin came here 2 years ago. And, the first thing he did is join as a DCC. He's a professional political operative. He would love the feather in his cap to knock out a popular Republican. That's his Twitter feed is basically anti-Republican. There's nothing moderate about him. That's what he is. A young kid, political science kid, works in politics, wants Democrats to win at all costs, no matter what. Doesn't know Brantford. I get that because I was in that situation 12, 13 years ago. When I first moved to Brantford, I'm 43, so now really about 14, 15 years ago, I joined a Democratic town committee immediately. It's one of the first things that I did. And I went door to door for Uncle Ross. I was expecting at some point to run on the RTM. I think I'd be a pretty good elected official. But that said, I very quickly realized that I didn't want to be part of something where I'm told who I have to like and dislike based on political party. It made no sense to me. It's not logical. The people who are diehard Republicans and diehard Democrats, logic is not really their game. And especially when it comes to local politics. I mean, I was a Democrat because I supported Obama. I supported, healthcare for all. I supported where we went with military spending. I supported women's rights. I supported abortions. I had support for all these national issues. How does that translate on where I want public works at a local level? Why would Democrats be better at that than Republicans? And now you have a first selectman with a degree in economics who ran a major construction company. And you have Brockett, who is a lawyer, coming in telling us how to use a property that was owned by the Cosgroves years and years and years ago. It's a barren wasteland. I get it's election season. I get that you have to say whatever you have to say to get elected. But Brockett is now taking his videos and taking his lies and spamming every Facebook page and posting it everywhere constantly. Have you ever seen Jamie Cosgrove do that? Have you ever seen Jamie Cosgrove put out propaganda videos? Have you ever seen him spamming Facebook pages? I never have. He's a Republican. I'm a Democrat. I've never seen it. Last election, I endorsed every single Democrat that ran. He's a Republican. Would I like to see Democrats win more often than not? Sure. On a local level, it plays no role. And this is a perfect example why. Because issues like what to do with 77-acre property that the town took illegally has nothing to do with politics. Has nothing to do with the reason Kevin Coughlin wants to win. Has nothing to do with anything Brockett has said or done. I'm going to make just an honest statement. Again, I have no idea if Brockett's a good father. I'm sure he is. I'm sure he's a great husband. I'm sure he's a good personal guy. I have yet, in a professional capacity, seen him say anything that made sense. At any RTM meeting, at any Board of Selectmen meeting, at any meeting, I have yet to hear him say something that stood up under scrutiny. It's just idiotic. And we got to that disaster with Tabor by having really poor decision-making by our leaders. If you want to open the door to affordable housing at that site or to any development at that site, do not listen to Tom Brockett. Do not have public hearings. Don't have a special master plan. We own the property. We'll put as applications come in for passive things, we can put it up there. But if you open the door, you may not like what comes in. Don't do it. This is nonsense. And at the end of I am shocked. I got to be honest with you. I'm shocked that anybody's dumb enough after the albatross that the Tabor debate was around this town's neck for 10 years, that somebody says, you know what? I want to run my campaign on Tabor. Are you nuts? By the way, I covered every meeting. I've read every lawsuit. If you're wondering who dumped on that property, the treasurer, Kurt Schwanfelder, the current treasurer on the Democratic side, who's on the Brockett ticket, was the one who gave testimony on the dumping that was happening there and the barrels that were turned over there and the waste that was on that property, leading to a vote to take it by eminent domain. Your own treasurer! And you have the balls to say Jamie's turning this into a wasteland? What is wrong with you? It's been a wasteland for decades. That's what it was. And you put out a video and spam everybody's Facebook pages with it. I never understood people trashing their own town. You want to talk about open space and environmentally friendly? When you talked about the good things at Tabor, you left out the solar panels. That wasn't advantageous for you. Cosgrove put a huge portion of solar panels on that property. You don't believe me? Go see it. But Brockett left that out of his video. Because for some reason, Brockett's going to run on environment now. He's going to run on funding the Coastal Resiliency Fund, invented, by the way, by Cosgrove. He's going to run on we want more solar, led by Cosgrove. He's going to run on making town buildings energy efficient, a major plan while Democrats fought it. Everything Brockett's running on, Cosgrove's already doing. So apparently the campaign is to say, listen, we can't run against him because he's done a very good job. He's not political, so we can't go after him politically. He doesn't care about the political fights. He nominates more Democrats than Republicans most of the time on town meetings anyway. He has left the Democratic chairman of the Board of Finance in place when he could have appointed anybody. He's reappointed all the Democrats in the Board of Finance every time they've come up. Democrats lead a bunch of different town departments. If you're going to trash your own town and revise history and then not even bother to know the history of Tabor, don't try to lie to residents. Don't try to mislead residents. At the end of that is a picture of Brockett and Dunbar. Dunbar, you got to answer this too. I know you know the history because I know you were a police officer at the time. I know you ran for politics. You have to know the history. There's no excuse for what Brockett did. They're going to leave it up because that's what they do. They don't have, if people are sincere and they make a mistake, they say, man, we shouldn't have put that out. We'll take it down. When people are not sincere and they're called out on their shit, they double down on it. Brockett's going to double down on it. And we'll be here to talk about it. Okay, that said, let's move on to the other topic for today, which is masks. So I put on Branford 7 over the weekend because we're getting a lot of calls on this. A question on where people stand on masks in school. Now, part of what brought this up was a video I saw, and it was sent to me by multiple people, of a gentleman who stood up at the meeting and gave what I would say maybe borderline inappropriate, almost threatening. At one point he goes, I don't want to make threats, but I don't know what that means, but about kids not wearing masks in school. And I'm going to tell you my viewpoint before posting that, and I'm going to tell you my viewpoint after. My first initial viewpoint on masks in school was, in general, kids don't care. And kids adapt to things. Usually it's the parents that are reacting a certain way. I did see the rally at Exit 53 recently, but kids adapt. If you tell them to wear masks, they may not like it at first, but they put it on and they go play and then they're fine. And for the most part, that's the reaction that I saw. There are a few things that popped in my head which leave questions and possibly could be answered or should be answered by the Board of Education. There's no right answer to this. I give a lot of leeway when it comes to dealing with COVID to the board and to even Hamlin Hernandez because we haven't been through this. Like, we don't know what a second wave of COVID looks like. We don't know, right? We're looking at information in real time. A year from now, we may find out this information meant different things. So we're all kind of winging it to a certain extent. But there are two things that jumped out at me. One was a few comments about their children who are hearing impaired or deaf, and how they can fall significantly behind without the ability to read lips or see someone's face as they're speaking. That jumped out at me, and that actually kind of hit me. Like, that makes, I never thought that. It didn't, I don't know anybody who, well, I know one child who is, but I didn't think that way. So I want to say that's actually a very valid point. I'd like to see if the Board of Ed is considering that or looking at that in some way, shape, or form. The second one is this, and I know this from experience, that our elementary schools don't have air conditioning. And a mask without air conditioning is rough. Over time, these are kids, they have energy, they're running around. That mask is just covered in sweat or whatever, and with no air conditioning. So will this lead to perhaps canceling a few school days over a certain temperature? If the temperature outside is over 85 and there's no air conditioning, we may not cancel that day without masks. But if you're asking our kids to wear masks, that might be a little bit much. And so those are the two questions I would have for the Board of Ed. I don't have advice on which way to go. They've sent out a letter already which said we're wearing masks, and I think that they'll stand by that. And there's nothing I've seen that should change that. I don't think it's crazy to ask kids to wear masks in school. And you can argue that it's not doing anything. You can argue, the numbers are full, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, do the kids care that much? No, I don't think so, until it starts bothering them. So the AC thing is a significant issue for me. What was a little bit of, we got this money recently from the federal government as part of the COVID money. And I'd like to see that go towards air conditioning in schools. I did not see a significant push for parents for that. And I'm surprised by that. I would like to see air conditioning in our 3 elementary schools. There were some talks about more teachers, or we talks about some other additional playground stuff or whatever it was. I did not see a push. I would like to have seen more of a push from parents to say, wait a minute, it's time to get air conditioning in school. Wearing masks in an unair conditioned school could be incredibly uncomfortable. And so I could see the Board of Ed saying, listen, and I don't know this for sure, and I did not talk to Board of Ed members. This is just my initial reaction, seeing we had like 200 comments on that and reading through so many of them. And some said things like, I'd rather do that than die. I don't know. But it'll be interesting to see how we treat like the first month of school. If September 17th, whatever that falls on, happens to be a 90-degree day, we'll see. So they're doing AC in elementary. Okay, but we're not going to have it by September. So without air conditioning in the schools, how do we treat hot days wearing masks in September? That's the question. Murphy and Tisco do have the ductwork. I think the idea was, remember, Slaney's an old school. So yes, Murphy and Tisco have it. I think there's a fairness question on should 2 elementary schools have it and one not. So they went with nobody having it. Slaney's an old building. And there were discussions in the past about doing Slaney. Before Walsh was done, a study was done by the Board of Education. They had multiple meetings. They had parents involved. They looked at buildings to do. The thought process under Cosgrove was to say, wait a minute, Walsh impacts everybody. The real issue with Walsh is this. And this is why Walsh was done, and it made a lot of sense. We lose students when we got to the middle school because there were families that did not want to send their kids to that open system. So a lot of kids, if they could, went to private school at that point because that school was so open. And the kids that couldn't afford it, especially if they had learning issues, had a really hard time in that school. So Walsh was done first. I would imagine 10 years from now, there'll be a new signing. Right now, we have a lot of projects going on, but I would imagine 10 years from now, we start the project, start in 4 or 5 years looking at signing this next school, and they'll be either at that location. I've heard the idea of taking Tisco and expanding it. I've heard the idea of putting expansions on Tisco and Murphy and just having 2 elementary schools, which actually makes sense and is more cost effective. But those ideas can be talked about down the road. But so the 2 questions I have moving forward with masks in school, and I don't know the answer to this. I'm not asking the question leading to an answer. I'm asking because I don't know the answer, is how do you handle those that are deaf and need to see mouths to learn? That's one. And 2, how do you handle really hot days in the elementary school? Because I think an 85, 88 degree day with masks can be really, really hard for those kids. So those are the only 2 questions I'm left with. But thank you for all the comments. It's good to hear from the community. Most people were basically saying, we'll be fine. There were some people against them. That's fine too. In general, I have not seen the kids negatively impacted. And if people have evidence of the kids being negatively impacted, please send it to me. I'd like to see that as well. Okay, clearly we were longer today because of the president's speech. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that tomorrow in the aftermath of that and where we sit with Afghanistan. Again, on the Tabor thing, I don't have words. I don't have words for what Tom Brockett's doing. I get Kevin Coughlin. Kevin Coughlin is the chair of the Democratic Party and apparently managing that campaign. He's a political operative. He's going to do and say and have his candidates do whatever they have to say to hopefully win or gain ground on Jamie. I get that. It's ugly. It's the reason I'm not involved. I was on the DTC years ago. I left for that reason. I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to be that person that had to spin stuff and lie and make stuff up for my team to win. It didn't make sense to me. But I get it. Tom Brown, you can't go around and say Tom, and Tom is part of the town, and he loves this town. He knows the history. Yet you give a video that is so misleading and blatantly dishonest, and misses the actual history of Tabor, like it's real. And then you push it everywhere, and you lie to residents and your neighbors all over town. Yeah, I know Tom. I know I don't vote for him. I know he shouldn't be elected to anything. That's what I know. And if you're going to keep lying to residents, well, just come out and say it. What I'm telling you is bullshit. If you do any research, you realize it's bullshit, but listen anyway, it goes that way. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate for every resident who went through the Tabor debacle and knows the history of it. All right, we'll be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for sticking with the podcast as we went through the president's speech. I was glad we heard that. We'll be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Until then, guys, have a great night.